There was a moment before recording this conversation when Bahar and I discussed concealing her identity. That alone speaks to the reality many Iranians continue to live with, that speaking openly about one's experiences, memories, or criticisms of a regime can still carry consequences even across borders. The conversation that unfolds here is ultimately about much more than geopolitics. It is about exile and belonging, mothers and daughters, about language, memory, and what happens when people are separated from their homeland. It is about the emotional cost of migration, the preservation of culture, and the search for an inner home when the outer world feels unstable. Bahar speaks with remarkable honesty about growing up during the Iranian Revolution and later returning to Iran during the women life freedom movement while caring for her aging mother. But woven through these stories is also something deeply hopeful. A commitment to healing, rewilding, community, and remembering what makes us human. I'm very grateful Bahar chose to share her story openly. Hey everyone, I'm Yamuna. Welcome to the first season of The Long Road Home, a podcast where travelers, storytellers, and culture makers I've met along my global journeys share the stories behind their paths, their roots, the roads they've traveled, and how those journeys have helped them find their way home in the world and within themselves. I'm so glad to have you here with me. Let's go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Long Road Home. Today, I'm really glad to be in conversation with Bahar G. Bahar was born in Tehran, Iran in 1974, the youngest of 10 children, and grew up in an affluent family. However, all of that changed during the Islamic Revolution when her family's assets were frozen and they were not able to leave Iran for years. In her early 20s, she immigrated to Canada, and after going through a divorce and experiencing a deep sense of aloneness and depression in Toronto, she chose to become a psychotherapist to better understand human pain. That journey didn't stay confined to an office. It took her to the Amazon rainforest and into work around rewilding and land preservation in different parts of the world. About 6 years ago, when her mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, Bahar returned to Iran, living in Tehran during a time of major social and political tension with the women's freedom movement. She moved her elderly mother to the United States, and since then has been moving between countries and households, which led her to explore what it means to build a strong inner home and to stay in relationship with others through it all. I'm really looking forward to getting into your story, Bahar, and everything it opens up. It is so good to have you here. I would love if there's anything that you want to add to my intro and probably say your name once more.
Definitely. Thank you, Yamuna. Thanks for inviting me. And my name is Bahar. And you pronounce it very well. Thank you very much. And I don't have anything to add on. I think it's a good start. Let's begin.
For those of you listening, Bahar and I actually met, I want to say, 7 years ago, possibly 7 or 8 years ago in the Amazon rainforest on a retreat that she was organizing and part of in the Brazilian Amazon. And I was the photographer for the retreat. And that is actually where we first met each other. So we have a pretty cool history and have had some interesting experiences since then. But what I really want to get into, and one of the reasons why I invited you on this podcast, is because you are from Iran. And I think that's by itself kind of loaded at this moment with what's going on geopolitically. And to ground the listeners in this experience, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about growing up in Iran. I believe you lived there until you were about 20. yeah, just like ground our listeners in your cultural identity, the political history of Iran when you were born. Paint a picture for us of, Iran in your childhood.
Definitely. So yes, I was born in Tehran, Iran. Iran is a very multicultural, multi-ethnic, and multi-religious country. Iran has a lot of voices. And I grew up in Tehran, in a gated community up in the mountains. And my father was the first person who brought the machinery, industrial machinery in Tehran, in Iran. And our house was wall to wall to the North Palace of Shah. When I was 5 years old, the revolution happened. And when the revolution happened, our world and a lot of people's world definitely changed. There was a lot of hope with revolution, even though my father didn't have any, he was not pro-Shah or anything. He was a political man. He had lefties ideas and he had underground print house in Tehran. So he was caught and our assets was frozen. And like many other people that at that time during the revolution, their lives changed. Our life changed.
Sorry, Bahar, you said you had a house underground? Is that what I heard you say?
He had a printing house.
Okay.
Yeah, it was basically he had some leftist ideas during the Shah's regime. And he was very political. So he was working underground. When the revolution in Iran happened, there were many social movements that they wanted to change. And of course, the Islamic regime took the power and the other voices got shut down. But he and his political side was a very lefties during the revolution. So he was an activist. Even though he was, this businessman and was benefiting from the Shah's regime, but he didn't like the political situation of the country. So he was an activist during the revolution. So, and then the revolution happened and Islamic regime got powered and, there was a lot of movement from women and other people that they were opposed to Islamic regime, but then the war happened between Iran and Iraq, and that kind of a nationalist urge was, people had to defend their countries. So basically, that war between Iran and Iraq, very soon after the revolution, kind of solidified the regime that lasted for 47 years.
I think that there might be some listeners out there that don't really know what Iran was like before the revolution. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like?
Yeah, very modern, very, very modern country. So Iran has like over, 2000 years of history. And it was, at the time, it was very modern. So modern in a sense that was quite westernized, in a sense that if you look at the pictures, you wouldn't think that the country that is right now is very, very different from what it was at the time. Iranian have like a very rich, like many places of the world. I myself, as I'm talking, just to let you know that I don't have necessarily very strong nationalist urge. I see myself as the human being of this planet. I have, royalty to the language, to the culture, to the land that brought me into the world, and my motherland. But I don't have necessarily a nationalist urge. I'm not a very political, like every person is political. I am political as being a human being. But I have not been involved with politics in my life. I haven't in the forefront of it. The other thing that I want to say is that I have not lived in Iran for 27 years, and it was only when my mother got sick, I had to go there, and I had to go back and forth for 4 years, and it was a very difficult time. I had to work there, and I had to be very involved in with people that it was during a very difficult time. So going back to your question, how was Iran before that? Um, it was not anything that this regime created, not for our environment, especially the environment in Iran is now during the past 47 years has really suffered. Our rivers have suffered. Our environment, our natural environment has suffered through this regime because of their mismanagement. And before it was a beautiful land. We have 4 seasons and different diverse climates in Iran. It was freedom, but like I was 5 years old. But a lot of people in the history, they wanted a revolution when Shah was there, was saying that there was, at the time, people went to the street because there was not equality in social aspect of life. There was
Right.
a gap between rich and poor, and people were not satisfied with that.
Okay. I've seen some photos and obviously explored some of this through knowing you and having some other friends. I mean, I've seen photos of Iran in the 70s and everyone's wearing bell bottoms and women have their hair open and exposed. And I've seen photos of people at, dance clubs and
Yeah.
really enjoying life the way that many of us from the Western world understand the concept of enjoying life. And so it seems that in the last 47 years, you're saying, since the revolution, which was in the late 70s, if I'm correct,
Yes.
things have dramatically changed. And there's been quite a conservative religious power that has taken over that country.
Yes, definitely this regime it doesn't represent Iran. You brought up Amazon rainforest, and my interest in the indigenous people of the world is because I resonate very deeply. Feel this for 47 years, our country has been occupied by this regime, occupied by the religious ideas that because Iran is very multi-religious country, there are diversity of ethnic inclination for the religious aspect of life. But this regime has occupied our land. So when I was 7 years old, I go to school, and this is the first time that girls, women of the country are forced to wear hijab. So before that, there was no mandatory hijab. And in this regime, women become the second citizens. The laws are we are half of the men, basically, because in the inheritance, we get half of the men. Women, like daughters, get a half of the boys. And in divorce, basically, women don't have the right to get a divorce. So it's like a lot of the, basically women becoming the second citizens.
Right. And I remember that time when you were in Iran because we were doing some video calls back then. So I recall like that moment in your life when you were back there going back and forth with your mom. And I know that since then you have, I guess, uprooted your mother and moved the matriarch of your lineage across the world to California now. And I think you told me that your mother's 93 years old. So probably she'll never go back to Iran. Is that correct?
Yes, unfortunately, there is no way for us because to take her back. Even she wanted us to take her body after she died, but even that is not possible anymore right now with what is happening in Iran with the war and political situation right now in Iran.
Right. So at least for the moment, while things are going on the way they are, there's no possibility of that for you. And I just wonder, like, the emotional cost of leaving Iran for your mother. You know, I think she lived there for her entire life. Is that correct?
Yes, and it is, well, I am a psychotherapist and I work with a lot of Iranians.
Okay.
And Iranians have really immigrated during this regime in a big numbers. In the history of Iran, it has never been this amount of immigration outside of the Iran that happened in the past 47 years. So I was talking to a client of mine yesterday, and we were talking about that basically the second generation and the third generation of our parents, their children and their grandchildren, mostly not in Iran. Like a lot of people immigrated outside of the Iran. My mother had to leave because her children were not there, even though she has like 10 kids. There's only one of my sisters at the time could stay, and she's back and forth between London and Iran because her daughter is in London. So basically, we had no choice because, as you pointed, her roots of her children, um, they couldn't stay in the country anymore. Like I left,
Right.
yeah, because the mandatory hijab and the social problems and not being able to really work as a woman. Like there's a lot of working women in Iran after the revolution have increased, but there is a situation is very tight socially. And yeah, so we brought her here in California, and it has been, as I said, I see myself as a person of this planet. And I'm sure that she's benefiting from the nature here. Tehran pollution was very bad, so her lungs was like suffering. So here in California, the air is clean comparing to Tehran.
And I can literally hear the birds chirping in the background where you are.
Yeah, yeah. So she's
So
benefiting from that. And then she was alone in Tehran for a while before we bring her. So that loneliness, so now she's in the family with me and my sister. So that is good. But she talks about it because she has Alzheimer's. Sometimes she is very confused when we tell her that she is in United States. She gets extremely sad. She can't believe that she is not home. She's not in Iran.
I can't imagine what that feels like for someone who's lived, almost a century in a
Yeah.
specific place, and their cultural identity, their political identity, their just identity in general is connected to a specific land. And your mother has obviously seen so many changes. She would have lived many more years in the modern version of Iran before the Islamic Revolution. And then, of course, would have lived much longer with a lot of repression. And even then, I'm imagining that there's a kind of a homesickness or a feeling of being uprooted. Even if she's in a beautiful place where the birds are chirping and the sun is shining, like, does she experience that sense of homesickness, especially as she's coming closer to her end, wanting to be in the place that she feels home?
Yeah, definitely. And imagine like the breaking up of the family of so beautiful if she was at her home and all of her children were, because when we were growing up, my sisters, so I am the last child, and all of my sisters and brothers, they stay in the same we stayed in the same neighborhood, so walking distance from each other. And she raised 10 kids and breastfed each one of them for 2 years. She breastfed
Wow.
20 years she was breastfeeding. So much of her life has been given to her children and to raising a family. And now it's like a time for her to sit back under the tree of her life and really being able to enjoy it of her children. And they are not around her, all of them, because we are, all different parts of the world. And even, going to the bazaar and talking to the taxi man, talking to people in the bazaar, talking your first language, looking at the mountains in Tehran, like the place that held you all your life.
That's right.
I consider myself being in exile with choice. I wasn't, forced to get out of the country, but definitely feeling in exile because I couldn't. But yeah, the sadness of not being able to stay in your country because the social situation doesn't allow you and force you to leave. And for her, it's very difficult. Yeah.
And in some way, because you took her out of Iran before the war started, there was some, I guess, luck or foresight or just a blessing in some sense, because I think now if you attempted to do that, it would be
Impossible.
really impossible.
Yeah.
And there would be the potential of you not being with your mother at the end of her life.
Yes. Yes, that's very correct. I feel like blessed to be able to be with her at this stage of her life. And it is important, the consistency of life and witnessing our parents going to their last chapter. As I always say, this is like my mother's last chapter of raising me, because I have to take care of her in this way and witness what happens when we go and become, old and vulnerable and fragile, and we are dependent, and watch and observe everything that comes with it. So I think that this kind of political situation of our world that force people to leave their lands and leave what they have known, it's kind of this break into the consistency of the beauty of life, to see all the colors and witness all the ages of our life as a family. So I feel lucky that I was able to bring her here.
Absolutely. And I wonder, because you speak Farsi and you're connected to your culture through your language, like, do you also feel that because you are able to speak Farsi and that's something that's a big part of your life and the language that you probably speak very often, that you have maintained a sense of connection to your Iranian heritage through language?
Definitely. I was thinking about the idea of home. And definitely language was the first thing that came to my mind, that how much a language is a sense of home. Land is, relationships are, but also language is very important for a sense of home. I immigrated when I was 24 to Canada, and even in Toronto, as we have the largest population of Iranian outside of Iran in Toronto.
Really? I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, so there's a lot of Iranian there, and I maintained the relationship with a lot of Iranians there, and also back home, because my siblings, it took them a while to come out of the country, so I still had like the relation. Still right now, I have two sisters and one brother in Tehran right now. And
Wow.
I have my childhood friends. So definitely I feel that kind of connection. I'm not in the social fabric of there. And it was a big wake up call for me when I went there to bring my mom, and I realized, wow, how much my motherland has changed and people have changed. Anywhere
Yeah.
I go, people, even though I don't have any accent in Farsi, and through the mandatory hijab and, dress code and all of that, I would say I look like any other person there. But anywhere I would go, to any store, as soon as I step in, they would say, "Oh, you're not from here. You're not from here," which was very strange for me. My mother, I wasn't a stranger in that way.
I know that experience from traveling with my mom in India, and she's South Indian, and it doesn't matter, how much you speak the language, or, they just see it on you. It's like they know you've lived somewhere else. They know that you have this touch of the other world. And I think she feels the same way that you do, as like a insider outsider or an outsider insider or
Yes.
something like that. But it is so wonderful that you speak Farsi, because I don't speak Tamil well. I mean, just enough that I can get by when I travel in India. But I do feel, a sense of loss in not being able to even understand my mother completely in her own language, because a language is a framework for understanding the world, and every single language has a different perspective. Even just with the words we use for certain things, you learn a lot about a culture. And so you are blessed again to be able to speak that language and to have continued to do that in Canada. And, I think that's an interesting point to talk a little bit about the immigrant experience of, I mean, you did say that you were exiled by choice. So, how would you consider yourself? I know you're a child of the world and you find a sense of belonging in the planet, but would you consider yourself like an exiled person, an immigrant, a Canadian? Do you have an identity marker of some kind that you resonate with?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And especially when the war happened with Iran, this recent war, and the two very big forces of the war, like United States and Israel, like going to war with Iran. It's like a small little country still, in the war. And I just realized I was asking myself this question a lot. I couldn't sleep. I had a very, very difficult time. And it wasn't only because I had my family there. I felt a sense of loss when I saw this, because there's a lot of UNICEF heritage places in Iran. Culturally, these places were bombed, many of them.
It's heartbreaking.
I have been there for, thousands of years there.
Mm-hmm.
They have this rocket town in that this regime has built under one of the oldest cities of this, fertile crescent of that region. This city has been one of the most beautiful and ancient city, and they have created this rocket city beneath it, that if the enemy wants to bomb it, it would bomb the city, So it's like kind of, for me, it was beyond my family. It was the people who were suffering there felt like sisters, brothers. We speak the same language. We have lived in the same land. I grew up in that land. So definitely a sense of being from that place is very, very strong in me. Being Iranian is
Mm-hmm.
very strong. Like it is, I would say it is the first layer of me. And also the language, poetry, culture, um, and then Canadian, definitely, I do feel Canadian. I'm extremely grateful for Canada to embrace me, the land, Before I immigrated to Canada, there was, prior to internet, I didn't have access to search where Canada is. And when I was 7 years old, the revolution happened and they forced us to put this hijab. And most of the teachers and educated people of Iran, they left. So they put us with these teachers that they really didn't have that much of an education, and the whole system was changing. The education system was changing. It was a mandatory Quran and Arabic. And so they were forcing a different language to us, forcing the religion into us. And so they didn't really teach us the world history, geography. There a lot of gap in my education when I was growing up, because I was the first generation of this revolution going to school. So they were changing as my grade one, as I was growing up. And it was in Iran, the other thing that was for me, created this lack of sense of home was like this regime created this division between home and public in a very big way. Because at home, you could listen to music, you could watch movies, you could, be free in your clothing or whatever you wear. And when you are in the public, you couldn't say certain things. You had to put the hijab. You couldn't listen to music. You couldn't watch movies. Basically, they would stop cars, these revolutionary guards. And if you had movies or music, they would get you, you couldn't go to the parties and listen. And when when the revolution happened, I was 5 years old. Our house was raided. The revolutionary guards came to our home and got my father's library of all the books. They cut our books because they burned a lot of books. They burned a lot of our mythology and our history. They didn't want people to identify with their mythology and their stories, because they wanted to force this religion story into people.
Right.
So that was this division between home and the public.
I think we were talking about your immigrant experience in Canada, but I'm so fascinated with this aspect of your childhood. And, the sense of not only this kind of loss of national identity or cultural heritage, but how it really expands. It's a collective loss, because it's really the heritage of humanity,
Yes.
books and mythology and stories. And I'm remembering in 2001 when the Taliban, bombed the Bamiyan Buddhas, and they were also thousands of years old from what I remember. And it's just like so painful as a human to see, the small minded politicians of today dismantling the collective wisdom and stories of humanity going back thousands of years.
Yes. Yes.
And I can't believe you actually lived through that and had this experience of, it sounds like you were persecuted. Your family was persecuted because your father was a bit leftist and you had these sort of affluent lifestyle and certain things. It sounds like there was persecution involved in your upbringing.
Yes. Yes, definitely. And especially the experience of, being a child and your house getting raided, and that if they find anything, because my father at the time was in prison, so they imprisoned him for a year and he was condemned to death. And when they raided our house, they were searching for my other siblings to see who else is involved. And it was very, very scary, it was extremely scary. And so this national identity, loss of that national identity that you said, and you asked me about the question of Canada. And I was saying that there was no Google to find where Canada is. Like for me,
Right.
and I couldn't, but for me, Canada I just saw it in movies that we could rent in underground market. And so Canada was this idea in my mind that was an environmentalist country. It's like I
Mm-hmm.
thought Canada is the national identity of Canada is a country that cares for the planet and cares for trees and people live in peace. Like that kind of idea before, kind of very idealistic idea for me was when I immigrated to Canada. And
Has it lived up to those ideals?
not really. Not really. Like waking up to what happened to the history that's in Canada and the indigenous people there. I was very lucky that I became a teacher right away when I came to Canada. I think it was a very good education for myself, because I, I taught French in school. And so it was very good to learn about Canadian history and what has happened to Indigenous people and what's happening right now with the environmental situation in Canada. So there's a lot of disappointment, I would say, from the political side of life. And at the same time, Canada raised me. Really, I love Canada, especially Toronto. I wouldn't say I don't know about living in a small town in Canada. How would I feel? But in Toronto, I never felt a foreigner, which a lot of Iranian in different parts of the world, they have a lot of immigrants part of the world. They speak of being this foreigner, not sense of belonging. Um, I felt I belonged to Toronto when I arrived. There was something about all these different people from all different parts of life and in part of the world. They are there and living together. And Toronto, the word, as you know, probably is the indigenous word that means a meeting up place.
I love that.
Yeah, so different tribes of the region, they would meet in Toronto you know, before the settlers come. And Toronto was this meeting place. And so the spirit of the world is still alive in this meeting place.
I love
And
that.
yeah,
That's
so
really cool. And I do want to get into all of the other things that have happened in your life since you came to Canada, because I think you've got such an interesting story and you've been involved in so many cool projects, including the place that I met you in the Brazilian Amazon and the work you were doing. But I do have one last question that came up when you were talking is, where is your father and what happened to your father?
yeah, my father finally, we could get him out of the prison. They didn't kill him,
Execute him.
execute him in prison. He passed when I was 19. He had a heart attack and he passed. Since he was in a solitary confinement and he never really recovered, his soul really never recovered from that experience. He was in prison 2 times during the Shah's regime and 2 times after the revolution under this regime. Both
Okay.
times they tortured him, and both times he was in solitary confinement. He has
Wow.
a very long story of his political way. Definitely he had a lot of problem with Shah's regime, and he had problem with this regime that came to the power. And right now it's very interesting because I listen to these diasporas of Iranians. There's very divided. There are a lot of voices. And I understand why my father was opposed to both of these inclinations. Because there's a lot of voices right now that's behind Shah's son, which I understand I cannot align myself at all. To me, it feels very right movement, quite racist movement, doesn't include the diversity of Iran and has different, not a very right idea of the nationalism of Iran, and very similar in some of their propaganda close to this regime, actually. So I understand why now I understand why my father couldn't align himself with neither the Shah nor this regime.
Okay, thank you very much for touching on that. So, I want to shift gears a little bit because your work in the world has been so fascinating. I know you are a psychotherapist and you're currently working with relationships, but I do want to go back a little bit to, your work in the Amazon, and I think you've been doing some rewilding project in Scotland and perhaps various other countries. So I'd love to know, what was the inspiration for getting into that kind of work for you? And tell us a little bit about it. What was that work about?
Yes, definitely. So it's all about healing for me, coming back to letting go of our character armors, healing the traumas that human being going through their lives. And for me, definitely the war situation in Iran, the revolution, the war, 8 years war between Iran and Iraq when I was growing up was very difficult. And then immigration, and then getting divorced because I came to Canada with my ex-husband and his family became my family. And then I had to get divorced. And all of that created a lot of injuries in my soul, I would say. And I was after my own healing. I wanted to be connected to life and be alive on this planet. So began with that. It began with that. When we feel alive, then the first step for me is to understand the relationship between all living beings of this planet. I think it is a natural processes that when you heal, you care. You care deeply for what is happening
Hmm.
and for other living beings of the planet. And waking up to what is happening to Amazon rainforest, to the rainforest in the Atlantic rainforest of Scotland. There's 1% left. And initially I got interested in that because I was always like looking for, the causes of these injuries of human soul. And one of those ones for me has always been isolation. And because of my own experience of being in Toronto, my husband left and my ex-husband left. And I looked around and I realized I don't have anybody. I didn't have anybody in Toronto. And I was away and I was from my hometown and from my family. And I grew up, as you can imagine, 10 kids. When we were intimate relationship, when we like at Fridays, that is our day off, my family, when they get together, we were 40 people,
Wow.
just my siblings and their children, 40 people. So it was almost like a village. And I came out of that and I came to Toronto and I felt a big sense of isolation. So I wanted to create a business for the co-housing. And I wanted to understand what it means to live in the community. And when the COVID specifically happened, also there was a lot of isolation for people. And I started interviewing eco villages of diverse different eco villages in different parts of the world. And one of them is the oldest one is in Findhorn, Scotland. I got in touch with the director of Findhorn and I set an interview with her to find out what is happening to the communities of people living together under COVID situation when there's all this isolation is going on in the world. And she introduced me to this beautiful woman who is half Japanese and half Iranian. And she has founded Trees for Hope. That is an organization that wants to basically the mission for the organization is to rewilding the Atlantic rainforest and also rewilding a hope for rewilding the Fertile Crescent. And Fertile Crescent is Iran is part of the Fertile Crescent. This is a name that was the most fertile part of the world actually, and now it is a lot of environmental disaster happening because of the political situation there. So she and I started dreaming about what happens as indigenous people have taught us that whatever you do now, it is for 7 generations in the future. And we started dreaming what would happen 7 generations in future if we plant some seeds of rewilding what we have right now on the planet. And so yes, I have been involved with that. Unfortunately, it is almost impossible to do any environmental activism in Iran because there is a lot of execution, a lot of imprisonment of environmental activists in Iran. It is almost impossible to do anything under this regime there.
Wow.
Um, but in Scotland, this organization, the Trees for Hope, they have the rewilding workshops and um, they are bringing people who have roots in Fertile Crescent, either in Afghanistan, Azerbaijan, in Iran, to come to this workshop if they are immigrants living in Britain to come over there and learn how to do rewilding. So one day, maybe their children go back there or this knowledge can be passed through and one day maybe it comes back again.
Well, that's amazing. I will definitely share some links in the show notes. And I had an opportunity to visit Findhorn just for a day. I was with my father, actually, who is Scottish, and we were traveling around the country and we just did a visit over there. So I've seen that area and the project just sounds amazing. And I had no idea, like, if I'm not mistaken, you said that there's 1% of the Atlantic rainforest left?
Yes, yes.
And I didn't even know there was such a thing as an Atlantic rainforest, to be honest.
Yes.
I've never heard of that. So that is really fascinating. And
Yeah, it is only in Scotland that I'm saying is 1% left in that
yeah,
region. Yeah, yeah.
that is really sad. And then the Amazon was kind of the same for you. It was related to environment, but also related to self-healing.
Yes, definitely. And it was understanding the medicines of this world that is available for us to heal our spirit and heal our psyche and getting a better understanding of that. And also meet, as I said, I really resonate with indigenous people of this world and have been very moved and learned a lot from Yawanawa tribe in Amazon rainforest of their ability to go to preservation of their stories and preservation of their plants. And the same thing in Iran is happening now. For me was a hope. After this regime, if this regime goes away, finally, is it possible for us to go back and find our elders or people who have been preserving our mythology and our stories? And I've always been, sad to know that this huge immigration has happened outside of our land. And maybe the second generation, as you're talking about yourself, that with your mother tongue, that the second generation, probably even if they try to speak the language, eventually it goes away, because probably it is much easier for you to speak English with your daughter
Mhm.
than your mother tongue. So it's like kind of loss of the language, you know. And so the Yawana was, you know, preserving the language, their stories after being under the influence of missionaries for 30 years, I believe. I don't remember exactly how many years. I think 30 or 35 years. They were forced to put aside their ceremonies. The same with us, Iranian, because we have there are very earth-based ceremonies that we had, like for our we go based on solar calendar. Our New Year is the beginning of spring, and it is not a religious date. It is earth-based, and a lot of our calendar that was very earth-based was erased, and we had to follow the religious calendar. So the same with Yawanawa, a lot of their ceremonies were taken away from them. Their language was taken away from them, similar to many indigenous people of this world, in America and in Canada, in Australia and New Zealand. And I'm really moved by Yawanawa tribe and by Maori tribe in New Zealand, that they are trying to bring back who they are. And as you mentioned
Absolutely.
beautifully, these are our human heritage.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's so inspiring. I know that from our experience in the Amazon, we felt such a deep sense of welcome
Yeah.
and even home, you know, although it was so far from maybe what we would consider our home, you know, where we came from. But there was such a deep sense of belonging and unity and family, that was just so embedded and woven through everything that they did
Sure.
as a collective. And I think so many of the modern people of today don't have that experience. And even you with 40 members of your family on a Friday dinner are quite lucky to have had an experience with so much family.
Yes.
So many people live so isolated and alone and don't have that experience at all. Um, Even though it can be hard at times, as I know with an Indian family, sometimes it's a little overwhelming to be involved in, you know, with so many people, and it can be quite invasive. But at the end of the day, the roots are very strong and the network reaches very, very far. And that's, I think, how I felt when I was with the Yawanawa also, was this sense of homecoming and belonging, and it's like a welcome, such a deep welcome to be able to come and participate in their life after everything that happened to them, as you pointed out, with all the indigenous people of the world, that they even opened their doors to anybody,
Yes.
you know, because they could just hide somewhere and say, no, we don't want to talk to anyone anymore after what's happened to us. And it sounds like you, even with the experience that you've had, you've come out into the world and are actually, through your own healing and life experiences, helping others to reconnect in relationships and not feel a deep sense of isolation.
Yes, and the relationship, it is very interesting. And as you said, at these 2 points, 2 notes are very important, because, uh, there is something happened when people move to North America, to move to this land, conquer these lands and move to these lands. I talked to my mother, my mother-in-law, my partner now, who's from England. She's British, and she moved when she was 13. She moved to New Zealand with her family. At the time, they came with a ship, and they couldn't really contact. There was no cell phone. They could write the letters, but it was not easy, to stay in touch with the family back home. And I got to understand that how this kind of worship of individualism has maybe started so strongly here, because being an individual and independent has been really worshipped. It is, in contrast to the collective nations that really feel that we are collective and we are a community, and different values. There are different values of being an individual or being part of a community. It's hard when there's nothing and you have to stand on your own feet and there's no community. So you have to be strong and independent. I understand that. I'm my mother-in-law. But I think that's the evolution of humanity right now, because as you mentioned, there is this kind of suffocation and lack of boundaries and lack of, who am I? Who are you? Our pain is everybody's pain and nobody is like helping each, like in a collective way of life. There is also some shadows, as we put it in psychotherapy. There are some difficulties with being in a community, and there is some, shadows of being total and individual and isolated and alone and all of that. So I see as a part of our evolution is learning is like a breath of inhale and exhale, how to be with others and how to be with ourselves alone. And what is the rhythm for us, for each one of us. And they are both very important.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah. And I think the relationship is about that.
I wonder, like, as well, like, now that you've brought your, husband's family into the mix, and it sounds like you go to New Zealand sometimes, and you go to the United States to care for your mom, and you live in Canada. How do you balance all the responsibilities of caregiving for your family, but you're also maintaining your own life, your practice, your marriage? How do you live and move between 3 countries or more?
Yeah, at the moment, there's 3 countries between Canada, United States, and New Zealand. My partner's parents are also getting older. They are in their 80s, and we go and visit them. How do I manage? It is, I am in the river of life's river, and I'm going with the flow of it, honestly. I ask myself this question of how, because I have a very full practice. I care for 47 people at the moment in my practice.
Wow.
So I have a full practice going through all this life. I think at the beginning, it was very difficult when the journey with my mom started. One of my friends who was also a psychotherapist, uh, told me, wow, you have like this, this life in Toronto, you have a full practice, you have this office, and this is going to create a lack of coherence in your life when you go care for your mom, and you are going to stay in this holding pattern. I mean, you are going to be in a waiting room till she dies. And it may take for a long time, and you're going to wait, and this is not good for you. And it was a very good conversation we had, because I said, oh, I'm not going to be in the waiting room. I'm taking this as a life. And I asked myself, what am I going to gain out of this at the end of it for myself, aside from being a caregiver for my mother? And I wished for having an inner home that is very solid. I
Hmm.
wanted a very solid inner home that can go with the flow of life, can be in the flow of the river of life. And of course, life comes, you go back and forth, it ebbs and flow, but still that solidity. I wanted that solidity. And I think that it has been a work in progress, you know. I just came back from New Zealand, and I stayed there for 2 months, and I was, with my partner's parents in their house, and I was seeing my clients in their camper van, making life happen there and managing. Also, that as soon as I stepped into New Zealand, the war happened between Iran and United States and Israel. And I was going there to be for my partner, to be for his parents. And although they are politically aware, they knew what was going on, still they were not Iranian. So they didn't know what the depth of what I was going through. And there were moments there and moments here in California that I do feel I have a solid home, inner home. And so even these moments that I feel, oh, I've created that is important, and for me, the meaning of inner home is this moment that you come back to the the silence of your body, the temple of your body. Remember that life is bigger at this moment. You're connected to the moon, stars, and sun, and the trees, and this planet. You remember your space and place in this planet.
That's so good for everyone to hear. And, on that note of like creating a strong inner home, I know you founded a business
Yes.
using the ancient technology of altar making at home.
Yes.
And I would love if you would just let us know a little bit about what the altar making is and what this business means to you.
Yes. So altars are, aside from the religion, has been a technology that human being, in the history of human being, we had it even prior to any monastic religion. People would, in ancient time, they would put like a stone and make that their altar, and gather around it and to sing songs and play music or dance. And so this is a moment of returning. Is a technology that helps you to return home for me. And so the business of Alter State, this my business that I founded with my partner, Alter State. We basically tapping into different religion icons as again as a human heritage, that these icons that bring us back into what it is important, what is our creating a moment of pause and creating an intentional life, basically. Just before this movement, specifically with my mom going back and forth to Iran, I had altars always in my home. So that these altars would be either depending on what kind of qualities I wanted to grow in my life. Because, the qualities beautiful qualities of human being, we need to also to preserve. I remember when I went to Iran, I wanted to have a goodbye gathering for my mom invited all of her families of a very big family, to say goodbye so that she can say goodbye to them because they wouldn't see her anymore when we were bringing her to United States. And I sat with some elders of our family, and one of the elder I had this conversation with, and she said, Bahar, the kindness is getting extinct here with people being socially sick, basically. There is a social sickness that has created that it is very hard to keep kindness, to preserve kindness. It's going extinct. And I could feel that. When people are always in the survival mood and there is no one to turn for protection and there's a lot of corruption and all of that, some of our human qualities may go extinct. Right now in our world, that attention is a part of the economy. That, we live in an attention economy, that there are anybody who can steal your attention can make more money. Focus may go extinct. So the altar making was, for me, always part of making sure the qualities that I love and I cherish, whether they come from my mother lineage or from my father lineage, that I can preserve, grow, and stay in contact with. It's a courage, whether it is compassion, whether it is clarity, whether it's kindness. And my altars has always been that part of that, like staying in relation to the qualities that I want to preserve, and reflection and self-reflection of growing, learning. For a year, I had an altar that I was focusing on to learn about ease and what kind of obstacles of ease are in my life. Our person and our presence that we offer to the world is very important. So it's very important to work on ourselves so that we can give our presence.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So I created that when I was going to Iran. It was very important for me to know what intention I have to keep and preserve. What do I want to preserve when I go to Iran, and what I have to make sure that I don't lose through this journey. So that was the role of altars for me.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. And I will definitely add some links to that business for listeners. And, we are coming to the end of our time together. It has been absolutely fascinating to speak with you and to hear every story that you've had to share. I think considering, the politics of today, this is going to be a very informative conversation for everyone to hear. And I just want to close with asking, what do you see in your future in terms of, I don't know, maybe not where you want to live, but do you think you'll ever go back to Iran? What is your hope for the future?
I always hope to go back. There is always a hope. I always hope for going back and landing myself on a land and growing vegetables and leaving, rewilding a part of our forest in northern Iran for the next generation. There's always that hope. Whether it happens or not, I don't know. I don't think that it would happen as long as this regime is there. It is very difficult to live with the political situation there. Yeah, and also I hope that I can stay, for the world can, not only me, but the world can stay, the human of the world can stay, focus on what is important, what is essential. Because as you remember in Yawanawa tribe, we interviewed one of the teachers of there, and she said when the missionaries were there for 30 odd years here, the most important thing for us to remember who we are, and don't forget that. And I think that as a human being, it is very important for all of us, as our world going through such a chaos and with the social media, as our attention is really diverse and there's so much difficulty with our attention, so that we remember what is beautiful about being a human being, nurture that in the garden of our own, soul, and keep preserving the beauty of human being. That, I think that's my hope. Preserving the kindness and preserving the courage and clarity in our life.
That is so beautiful, Bahar. I can hear the poetry of your Farsi soul through your English words. Absolutely. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. We'll look forward to seeing what happens for you next. You've been listening to The Long Road Home, a podcast for travelers, storytellers, and culture makers, exploring the roots that shape us and the roads that lead us home. I'm Yamuna. See you on the road.